welcome back. Remember how I said I was going to do a two-parter for Cinderella? Here's the second part. Oh my gosh, there's so much to Cinderella. There's so many different versions, and I didn't realize it. I really didn't, not until I started researching it myself. This is why you do your own research, because you just don't know until you look into it yourself. Yeah, so let's go. Versions of Cinderella is known as The Little Glass Slipper, and it was written by Charles Perrault. Hopefully I'm saying that right. He's French, so I'm sure there's a French accent that's supposed to go with it. I am not French. I took French once, and I failed it. So there's not going to be any French speaking coming from this lady over here. Anyways, he's French. It was written in 1697, and that is one of the accepted earliest versions of Cinderella. It starts with the gentleman marrying his second wife, instead of going through the whole process of him losing his wife and then feeling like he needs to get remarried for his daughter. In this one, it's more of a formality. And if you put yourself back in the position of the 1600s, it's just how it was done. You get married because it's just expected. You have children because it's expected. If your wife dies for one reason or another, you get remarried because it's expected. And whether that's because the wife runs the household and takes care of the formalities of the house, or because she takes care of the education of your child, or any of that stuff, whatever it may be, it's just the formalities. The later Cinderella, there's a lot more depth to it, I think. However, she is described as being the most vain and haughty. Haughty is a very interesting word. I feel like it's very French, very European. Haughty, you don't hear that over here stateside. She had just the utmost contempt for all living things and people. And then her two daughters are described as being just like her. So that's the setup in this one. Right off the bat, there's no even really hiding it. As soon as they're married, she's just like that. There's no, the father dies and her true nature is there. And also, the gentleman's daughter is described as being sweet and kind, and that she gets it from her mother. So again, right off the bat, just setting it up. There's no hidden attributes. We're just, this is who we are. What really ticks off the stepmom is that Cinderella's good nature makes her daughters look bad by comparison. The father is alive. The stepmom makes Cinderella do the chores and sleep in horrible conditions. Meanwhile, Cinderella is just taking this because she's too scared to tell her dad he's under the thumb of the stepmom. And she believes that if she tells him, he's just going to scold her and take the side of the stepmom. I feel like a lot of people can relate to that, though, right? Where love, or you're just put in a position where it's just easier not to fight it, not to fight that person and their will. And so you just sort of let atrocities occur. It's not good. It's not good. A lot of times that is why abuse occurs, because you're too scared to speak up. And it looks like that's the dynamic in the Charles Perrault version. It was the younger sister who nicknamed her Cinderella. Originally, her name was Cindertail because she would sit by the ashes in the fireplace, and so as a result, whenever she got up, there was a little whirlwind of ashes that would follow her like a tail of cinders. And the younger sister was a little nicer to her, and so she gave her that little Ella to make it a little more beautiful. So there's a hint of kindness, and that kind of goes back to that nature and nurture thing, that you can be born with some predispositions, some genetics that can shine through, and it looks like the younger sister had a little bit of that. And if you look at the Drew Barrymore version of Cinderella, the younger sister has that. So I think that they were going a little more off of the Charles version of Cinderella than any of the other versions. It didn't matter that Cinderella was wearing rags and just the worst things, and that the stepsisters had the best clothes that money could buy. It is described that she was 1,000 times prettier. And I think that's a reflection on the fact that as a person, you can have the nicest things, you can have the most expensive stuff, but if you yourself are not a good person and aren't pretty, it's not going to matter. So just remember that. There's more to being pretty than what you wear. Their social standing, they got invited to the ball. Okay, pretty standard. But this gave more work for Cinderella, because now they needed stuff to be ready. They needed to do a bunch of stuff, right? And it was all they talked about. So now Cinderella's got to hear it. Have you ever been in that position where you have to hear everyone talking about something, but you're not invited to it? I know I have. Numerous times. I can only imagine any one of you who are listening have also been in that position where you have to hear about it, but you yourself are not a part of it. It's not fun. And I think that he's just trying to relate that to his listener. Charles is trying to relate that to his listener, that's the position that she's being put in right now. Went so far as to ask Cinderella her opinion on the stuff that they were going to wear and how they were going to do her hair. And of course, Cinderella, being the person that she is, she's giving her honest opinion. Yes, that's going to look pretty. No, I think maybe you should do it this way, because she's not malicious. So they know that they can ask her this, and that she's going to be truthful, and she's going to be kind. That is how you should be. That no matter what, you should be kind on the inside. It doesn't matter the abuse that you're being given, you should be able to turn around and be sweet back. But still, how much do you hurt for Cinderella? that she has to listen to something that she obviously would want to go to, and she can't, and then still have to give her opinion on it. Does their hair for them, and then when they leave to go to the ball, she cries. Oh my gosh. Have you ever done that? Held in all your emotions and just like were being strong, and then as soon as everyone leaves the room, that's your breakdown moment. That's it. I know I have. I'm not gonna act that tough. I can admit that has happened. As soon as everyone's left the room, there you go. The waterworks have started. Poor Cinderella. Of course, this is when the fairy godmother appears. Only she's not at first described as a fairy. She's just described as a godmother. And at the end, it says that you should have a godmother, and that if you're blessed by your godmother, that you have earned it. So you can have a godmother and not be blessed by your godmother. And it sounds like everyone sort of has a godmother with them. It seems like it's sort of like a spirit near you. I thought that was kind of cool, a little element in there. But she gives Cinderella tasks, and it's sort of like yet another way for Charles to be showing you who Cinderella is. Get a pumpkin. She doesn't tell Cinderella what the pumpkin's for. She has to go get a pumpkin. So Cinderella brings a pumpkin. She turns into a beautiful carriage. Open up the carriage door, mice run out. Bippity-boppity-boo, she turns the mice into horses. Then Cinderella goes and checks the rat traps and brings her a rat. And she turns the rat into a coachman. And then Cinderella brings her a lizard. And the lizard turns into a footman. So now we've got this whole setup. But of course, the last thing to change is the dress. We gotta have the grand finale. In this version, it turns into a gold and silver one with jewels encrusted in it. And I like that imagery, that's really pretty. Well, now she's ready, right? But she reminds her, only got until midnight. Gotta have that time limit. What is it I said before? Magic, whether real, manifested, imaginary in our mind, there's a limit to it because it sort of has to recharge. Magic doesn't last forever. And so she's got that limit until midnight. Your eyes at the ball, no one knows who she is. And it seems at first that it's the mystery that draws the prince. And so, again, going back to when this is written, the 1600s, I think Charles is sort of trying to, I don't know if he's even trying. I think it's just, there's an alluded concept that mystery for a woman is important, that you shouldn't just lay it all out there, that you shouldn't just put it all out, who you are, what you're about. And I think that still holds true, and I don't think it's just for girls. I think that's for boys too. There's no reason to just be overwhelming. You know, it's okay to have a little bit of mystery, but at first that's what draws the prince's attention. She's also dressed to the nines, and she's gorgeous and stunning, and no one can take their eyes off her. And I wrestle with this because I do believe it creates an unrealistic standard, but it also creates a goal to reach for. I don't know. I don't know where that line is. I don't know where the line gets blurred, because I do think we should reach to achieve a certain level in terms of our appearance and cleanliness and all that stuff, right? Because if we didn't have that, then we wouldn't ever shower, brush our teeth, wash our clothes. But there's a level, there's that point where it goes too far. You know, we're not gonna be perfect. You know, celebrities, they've got unlimited funds that they earn, right? Like, I'm not someone who thinks that they don't earn the money that they then use, but they do have money in order to achieve that level. And so it's hard to be like, well, of course, you write that she's stunning and no one can take their eyes off her. Why wouldn't the prince just want her? And how do little girls achieve that when they hear about it or see it? So, I don't know, that's a tough one. It's one I've wrestled with since I was little, and obviously even now, as an adult. Like, where does that line end and where does it get blurred? I don't know. What do you think? It's noted that the women take note of what she's wearing so that they can later recreate it themselves. So that's interesting too, because this whole time Cinderella's been wearing rags and she doesn't have a lot of things, and yet here on this night everyone's taking note of her. And I kind of like that, right? Like, she's getting a little bit of the limelight, and it's deserved. She works hard, she's sweet, she's not a brat, forgive the term. I'll look it up. I'll put it up here. She's not a brat, so she deserves a night of limelight. And I like that. I like that it's put in there in this one, that everyone takes note of what she's wearing. But anyways, the prince dances with her all night long, and she's dancing with grace too. Because would it be worth it? You know, like, yeah, okay, you want to dance, you're gorgeous, but then she dances like a goose, you know? That would have been ridiculous, right? But she's got grace in her. So there's more to her than just her looks. She makes her escape. Now in this version, there's 3 nights to the ball. And so she goes the next night. And that's when she loses her slipper, her glass slipper. And this is when the prince finds it. Because we have to have some clue. Like, it's not a good story if there aren't clues. So he finds it, and the next day, the sisters can tell nothing about how the prince obsessed the rest of the ball over this slipper. Didn't pay no mind to anyone else, which is what we're used to hearing. And now he's obsessed. There's that mystery, there's that idea that you leave clues about who you are. I guess that's what I would take away from that. And the slipper is a clue of who she is. Try it on to everyone. Try the shoe on. And they finally get to Cinderella's house, and it doesn't fit the sisters, but it does fit Cinderella perfectly. He looks into her face, realizes it's her, and the sisters beg forgiveness. She gives it because it's Cinderella. And there you go. Happily ever after. But there is, at the end, there's a little poem, and it gives like the moral of the story, and that is that beauty is a treasure to admire, because it's just something that we do. We admire beauty in nature, we admire beauty in animals, we admire beauty in a lot of things. So beauty isn't a treasure to admire. I think it'd be foolish to deny that. However, grace is priceless. That is something a little extra. Remember how I was saying she was able to dance gracefully? Because what's the point in being beautiful if you don't have that extra ability within you? Clothing doesn't make you beautiful. It's what's inside you that makes you beautiful. And that grace is preferred. And then lastly, too, that courage, wit, and a good sense are qualities to achieve. And I think those are good morals. I think those are all things that are worth noting. I think that regardless of the time period that this was written, because again, France, 1697, it could have easily gone a lot more superficial. And while I think it kind of did, I mean, the dad was alive and he allowed his daughter to be abused because he didn't want to bother with the fight with the wife. He probably was off doing diplomatic stuff or business stuff and just didn't want to bother with the household or girly things of the time. It could have been a lot more superficial than it was. At least at the end, they sort of gave that morals, and they were good morals to achieve. But there's other stories, so hold on, this gets a little further. There's more to Cinderella. I told you there's a lot to Cinderella. Charles Perrault, he wrote this in 1697 in France. He was born to wealthy parents, but he was the seventh child. And if you know a little bit about the way the social norms were back in those times, being the seventh child, you weren't in a great position. You were going to have to earn your money. You weren't just going to be handed the title or funds or anything like that, because that was going to go to the younger children. And so it seems that he went to good schools, he studied law, he even worked under some government officials. But apparently the arts was where his calling was. And a good thing, because we have some amazing stories because of him. And again, I know we all say that children's stories can seem foolish or childish, but they are also important because they teach us things as children when our minds are ripe and sponges, and then we pass these on to future generations. And again, this was the most commonly accepted first version of Cinderella, and that's due to the fact that this is sort of the first time we hear Cinderella, the name Cinderella. But this isn't the first time this story has been told. And that's what's really interesting. And I didn't know this until I did some digging into Cinderella. So the story, when you break it down, it's rags to riches. It's child being abused by family. Girl ends up marrying royalty. So knowing the basic story of Cinderella, we can then understand that this isn't the first time it's been told. The earliest known time this story has been told was actually in Egypt, and it was an oral story. If you know about literature, oral stories are the first forms of storytelling. Before we knew how to write, and I say we as humans, they were just passed orally. They were told generation to generation to generation. And some of these stories have lasted for a very long time, even without being written down. So the earliest version was in Egypt, and it was called, I'm probably gonna do this again, telling you, I was never gonna be linguistic, ever. It was called Rhodopis and Her Little Gilded Sandals. Oh, sounds a lot like Cinderella and Her Little Glass Slipper, doesn't it? Anyways, she was a Greek slave who ended up marrying an Egyptian king. I mean, how much more similar can you get? Then there's a few variations, but ultimately the next known version is a Chinese version in the 9th century. And it's, here we go again, Tuan Sheng Shi. Always feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. Give me the phonetics, please. I love to learn. And the main protagonist is Yeshin. So that's going to be like our Cinderella. And instead of a fairy godmother, she has a magic fish. So again, the similarities are striking. And it can be real easy to say, okay, so then these stories are plagiarized. Maybe. But some stories transcend time depending on the basis of them. So like the foundation. If every person, or if a big group of people have had a similar experience, then you can't say that that person has plagiarized those experiences. Think about it for a second. Like, really think about it. Remember how I told you about the Cinderella effect? And that is children who are abused by step figures. And then there's also other qualifications that fall into that after the death of a parent. There must be a majority amount of people in order for that to become a legitimized condition. Well, in storytelling, there has to be enough people for that story to touch, for it to be worth telling, right? And so now we can just like appreciate the fact that this story has touched so many people that it can be traced all the way back to ancient Egypt. That somebody in ancient Egypt related to this story just like someone today would relate to this story. To me, that's amazing. And I don't perceive it as plagiarism. Then we had Charles' story. And that's the one I just said. After them, we've got the Grimm brothers. We all know the Grimm brothers. Their stories are absolutely fascinating. They took this one and they rewrote it as well. And they called it Aschenputtel. Hold on, that was really wrong. Aschenputtel. Aschenputtel. Did I do that right? Anyways, that's how they did it. And that's supposed to mean Cinderella in German. And they rewrote it in 1812. That's not much longer. I guess it is. Yeah, it's a little over 100 years. So I would imagine that that's a good enough time to rewrite something. In their story, it gets a lot more graphic. In theirs, the sisters are pretty, but very vile. And they're descriptively cruel. I mean, there's quotes about how they would tease Cinderella. And I like this because you get some more insight to just how mean they are. In the other stories, you can feel a little bad for them. In the Grimm brothers, you don't feel bad for these sisters. They're not nice. They are not nice people. The father doesn't die either. He's there. He's just absent. And this must have been a very common thing and it's heartbreaking. So again, we're seeing how today fathers are a lot more present in the lives of their children, but back then, fathers were not present. And again, I say again a lot, obviously. I've noted that. But fathers had to do a lot to provide for their families. They were the sole income earners. And part of that is because they wouldn't let women work outside the home. So part of it's their fault, but on the flip side, they took on the burden of it. So how much stress can you take? And as a defense mechanism, they just put off any other responsibilities. And so Cinderella's being abused, and the father doesn't not care, but he also doesn't care, if that makes any sense. He's sort of disconnected from what's going on with his daughter at home. And the reason she's called Cinderella in the Grimm brothers story is heartbreaking. She's called this because they throw her lentils and her peas and her food in the fireplace, and she has to pick them out. So that's why she's called Cinderella, because she's covered in ashes, because she has to pick out her food from the ashes. The abuse in this one is far more descriptive than in any of the other versions. The stepmom for the ball, and again this one's a 3-day ball, is again a lot more descriptive. She gives her an impossible task. She throws a bowl of her lentils in the ashes and says, "You've got 2 hours to pick out every single one of them, and I've counted them, and bring them back to me." Well, Cinderella calls upon her birds, her little bird friends, and this is probably where we get the later Disney version of her having her friends, her animal friends, and they help her, which is lovely, which is just a nice imagery. They don't talk or anything like that. She just sort of calls them, gives them a little like poem, and they help her pick them all out, and she brings them to her stepmom. Her stepmom's like, "How'd you do this?" "Well, I changed my mind. It wasn't that, it's 2 bowls." So she takes 2 bowls and throws them in the fireplace and says, "Now pick out those 2. So she calls on her little birdie friends, and they help her one more time. And she brings these to her stepmom. And her stepmom's like, "Well, that was no help. You have nothing to wear." And says, "You're not going." It destroys Cinderella. She runs to her mom's grave, and she just weeps. And there's this tree there, and she's weeping at this tree at her mom's grave. And the little birds, they fly down this beautiful dress. I don't know where they got it from. They don't really describe it in the story, but it's a gold and silver dress. And Cinderella puts it on and runs to the ball. In this version, she does leave a shoe, but it's because the king, in an effort to sort of catch her for the prince, slicks the ground, and so it catches her shoe. But it was meant to catch her. So she does leave a shoe, because again, we need a clue, right? And this is the version where we get the one stepsister who cuts off her toe to try and fit into the slipper when the prince tries to find Cinderella. It's so gory. But the shoe fits, right? Because she cut off her toe. And so she rides off with the prince. But the birds clue the prince that this is not true, that there's blood in that shoe, and you need to check it. And the prince sees this, and he brings her back, says, "You've given me a false princess." And he tries it on the second sister. This sister cuts off her heel. Oof. And it fits. So then he takes her. The birds again say, "This is not true." And the prince sees it and brings her back and says, "You've lied to me again." And that's when he says, "Do you have anyone else in the house?" And this part is heartbreaking as well, because remember how I mentioned the dad is there, but he's absent? When the prince says, "Do you have anyone else?" the dad is the one who says, "We have a little kitchen maid, but she's not suitable to bring out." I mean, how heartbreaking is that? That at this point, it's the stepmom, the dad, the sisters, they're all abusing Cinderella. Well, the prince isn't going to have it. He says, "No, bring her out. I want to see her too." And so she comes out. Cinderella tries on the shoe. It doesn't matter that it's pissing off the rest of the family. The prince wants to see it. And it fits. Well, of course, the sisters come to the wedding because they want her good graces to marry so that she can marry them off to someone, you know, fabulous. And at this, the birds come and they peck out the eyes of the stepsisters. And they live the rest of their lives blind. Man, those Grimm brothers, I don't know, was it because of their name? Their last name was Grimm? That they were so grim? I, for one, am a huge horror movie buff. I love gothic horror stories. Give me some Edgar Allan Poe. So hearing these very down-to-earth stories that are very dramatic and the bad guys get their comeuppance, they were very mean to Cinderella. I don't know. Am I bad for being like, they deserve to have their eyes pecked out? And I like that it wasn't Cinderella who did anything to them, because she was sweet. All she wanted was to be treated equally. And it's sort of a lesson to be learned that nature took it upon itself to exact its revenge. That you're not alone. That someone out there, even if you don't notice it, sees your turmoil, sees your pain. And the birds are the ones who took the revenge. Okay, well, I think I'm finally done with Cinderella. Told you, there was a lot to it. A lot more than you thought. Sometimes the simplest stories that you think can be the deepest. But I will say, happy trails, and don't stop reading fairy tales. Goodbye. I hope I see you again. Subscribe if you want to. Don't feel obligated to. And maybe watch some more of my videos. Have a good day.